Before we begin today's episode, we want to take a brief moment to address some of the tragic events that have taken place in our nation. This podcast was recorded prior to the assassination attempt at Donald Trump's political rally in Pennsylvania, but by the time you're listening to this episode, those events have already occurred. The Christian Life Commission released a statement on social media over the weekend and has also sent out that statement in our newsletter, unequivocally condemning all violence, including political violence, but we also see ourselves as part of the solution, or we hope to be, through this podcast and other areas where we can have safe civil discourse about the things that are happening within our country. We want to help Texas Baptists and others be able to discuss political differences in a healthy and non-divisive way. I would encourage anyone listening to go back to episode 5, where we address being a light in an election year, and Dr. David Sanchez led us in a healthy discussion about political differences. And please know that this is an issue that is near and dear to our heart in the CLC. We recognize this is an election year, and that the next several months leading up to November will be stressful as people gather as families with very diverse political views. And we intend to have more episodes addressing this topic and to resource and help Texas Baptists in the future. Welcome to What is Good, a podcast from the Texas Baptist Christian Life Commission, where we explore contemporary cultural issues through a biblical lens. Micah 6:8 says that God has told us what is good, that we're to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with Him. So whether you're seeking a better understanding of how to live that out, or you're just curious to understand a Christian perspective of what's happening in our culture, we hope that you'll find today's conversation helpful as we discuss what is good.
All right, welcome to another episode of What is Good, the podcast of the Christian Life Commission. Your 4 hosts of the apocalypse are here today. On the horse of conquest, leading us to victory is our fearless director, Dr. Katie Fruget.
I'll take it. Let's just ride with it.
Literally, going to war for us at the Capitol for policies that ensure our religious liberties. And look out for the list of these. Our Director of Public Policy, lawyer John Litzler.
Good morning, David. I'm liking this 4 horsemen of the apocalypse analogy here. This is good.
4 hosts of the apocalypse.
4 hosts, excuse me.
Fighting against famine through the Texas Baptist Hunger Offering, our Director of Hunger and Care, Dr. Irene Gallegos.
Hello.
And that leaves death for me.
Oh, dear.
I'm your Director of Ethics and Justice, Dr. David Sanchez, reminding you to live morally upright, because you will die one day and face your maker.
That's an intro. Yes. That makes me feel anxious. Is that a good lead?
Yes, that's a great lead. It's funny that you say that, Katie, because today we're talking about the book, The Anxious Generation, How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness by Jonathan Haidt.
Height or hate is
it's
how
like,
I've
do
heard
I
it.
pronounce the A or the I, and is the D or the T silent? I'm not sure. I'll go with what you said. And the main thesis of his book is that the reason we're seeing a drastic increase in mental illness among young people, teens and college students in particular, is really 2 things. One is the impact of smartphones, and the second is the lack of unsupervised free play in childhood and how important that is for kids' development. But I want to start with just a fun question, since a lot of this has to do with cell phones. Can you remember when you got your first cell phone? What was it like, and how did it make you feel?
I vividly remember getting my first cell phone. I got it when I started driving, or my dad got it for me when I started driving. And I'm on the younger side of those who began driving. I think people are like delay driving now, but I was 15 when I got my learner's permit, and I had my license by 16. So somewhere in that age range is when I would have gotten my first phone. And it was that little Nokia, little like brick-looking thing, and it was super cool, and we texted with T9, and I was like fluent in T9 for quite a big portion of my adolescence.
And how good were you at Snake?
Ooh. I was also pretty good at Snake. I had other games that I eventually would probably be more like drawn to, but Snake was always fun.
I think I was a pretty good player at Snake. But I had to play that on or I got to play it on my brother's cell phone. I didn't have that. So I had to share a cell phone as early as 8th grade. And I shared a cell phone, and I only got it on game days. So anytime I had a basketball or volleyball game, I got to have the cell phone for that night so that I could call my mom when I was ready. And I got my own personal cell phone in the 10th grade, and that was a Samsung flip phone.
Yay. We're old. John?
So mine was kind of a combination of Irene and Katie's, so this is perfect. And it tells you that not only are we kind of all around the same age range, but like Katie and I are not just both millennials, but the same era of millennial generation, because I got a phone, my sophomore year, right around the time I started driving. My sophomore year, my brother was a freshman in high school, and so I drove him around. And so my brother and I shared a phone, like Irene. And Snake was I had a Nokia. It was a brick. It was one of those indestructible. It was kind of blue and gray, and it had like the tiniest little antenna on top. It wasn't a huge one, but it was like a little built-in like plastic. And
I know exactly which one you're talking
you
about.
could pop off the front and get customizable ones from like the mall. There were kiosks at the mall.
Yes.
And I remember my junior year when I decided I was going to UT, getting like a burnt orange Longhorn one to put on it. But my brother and I, one of the benefits of sharing the phone was my brother and I would play Snake against each other. We would keep one-upping each other's high scores, And that's one of the things I remember on the Nokia is my brother would borrow the phone to call mom and dad because he had an after-school activity that day and I didn't or whatever. And when I got it back, he had set a new high score. And so not only did I have the phone because now I had a practice or a rehearsal or whatever, but I also had to set a new high score on Snake before I gave it back to my brother again.
That's awesome. Being a little bit older than you guys, my first cell phone was a brick. I got it for going off to college from my parents. It had 10 minutes a month on the plan.
Wow.
It was
Yep.
only
it did.
for emergencies. And
Wow.
I didn't get...
But did it have free nights and weekends? The 10 minutes is during the day hours, right? Because remember how nights and weekends was a big deal? I would wait until 8 o'clock because that's when free night started. And at like 7:55, I'm sitting there waiting for it to become 8 o'clock so that I would be able to make a call.
Yeah, that's years later, John.
Okay, all right.
That's years later. It was 10 minutes total. And you better not go over because the rates afterwards per minute are ridiculous. Ooh. So, yeah. I do remember the first phone I was excited about getting. If you could remember that, it was the Samsung Rant. It was one that you turn it sideways and the QWERTY keyboard like slides down from behind.
Oh,
and it had the buttons. And I used that thing until they discontinued service to it. And I still am mad at iPhones for not having actual buttons that I can press because I make so many typos for that reason.
I still deeply appreciate that you use the iPhone because I'm one of those people that really gets bothered at the green bubble. So thank you for keeping our text threads blue. It just means a lot to my mental health.
Same.
And now I feel peer pressured to never switch to Android.
My favorite phone ever was my Motorola Razr. I loved my Motorola
yeah.
Razr. It was
the
thin
Razr
and
was
it could
so
flip.
cool.
And it was so great that now they've brought it back. But to make smartphone technology that folds is just so expensive that I don't think I'll ever get one. But they weren't smartphones, and so they were much more affordable, but they were really cool.
All right, well, let's move on to the next question so we don't spend the rest of our time geeking out. I don't think they'll ever bring back the actual QWERTY buttons. I just have to get over it. All right, so I want to summarize some of the main points in this book and then just ask questions because I am genuinely excited and interested to hear your thoughts. We have a running joke that every time we start talking about something that might be on the podcast, we say, save it for the podcast. Overall, we've done a really good job with that for today, minus a minor spoiler from Katie. But I still want to hear that story again when we get to it. So I'm going to summarize the book points and hear your thoughts. But I want to start by pointing out that we all have skin in this game, that all of us have kids that we're trying to raise with godly wisdom in a digital age where everyone has smartphones and where free play, where kids being able to just run around and play outside unsupervised feels like a thing of the past. So if you wouldn't mind sharing, just real briefly, your kiddo scenario. How many kids do you have? What ages are they? You can share their sex, gender if you want. And then just a quick yes or no on has this book had any impact on how you plan to raise them?
I have 2 boys, ages 1 and almost 4, and most definitely this book has impacted.
John?
I've got a daughter who is almost 6, and that's the only child in our household right now, although we have fostered before, and our house is open for placement, so we could get a new foster kid any day. And of course, I would apply some of these same principles with the foster child, although there are more rules there. But I'm a little torn on, and the jury's still out on how this book will affect how I raise my kid. I think I knew a lot of the dangers of technology already. And I know we'll get into this more later, but I think the part about unsupervised play for my kid, more freedom in the real world, might be even more impactful to me than making sure I set more restrictions in the virtual world, because I have already read a lot of books about setting restrictions for your kid in the virtual world, including books like Habit of the Household that talk about like limiting screen time and making it purposeful and stuff like that. So I'm still not entirely sure how it will affect, but I know this, it is just more research, more data that I'm putting in my arsenal as a parent to justify a lot of the decisions I'm going to make. So,
All right, lawyer John Litzler not able to give a quick yes or no. Let that be noted in the records. Katie, how about you?
That's awesome. So I have 3 girls, ages 12, 10, and 4. And short answer is yes. This book has helped give me reframe some of my concepts, or reaffirmed even some things that I was already considering doing. And then after reading this was like, no, definitely I'm going to do this.
All right.
And David, what about you?
Yeah, I almost forgot. I have a kid too. Thinking through this made me realize, Irene, you're the only one with boys. God bless you.
Oh. I say the same to those who have girls.
I do. I have a 10-year-old daughter, and I'm already like thinking through actually writing a book just to help her, like specifically with dealing with technology. And we've talked about that some, but we'll get into that later. But I've been absorbing this topic like crazy. So the first chapter of this book, John, you'll probably agree, starts like a lot of books on the dangers of technology start, just with all the statistics around the increase in mental illness in our young people, and how this rise coincides with the arrival of the smartphone from 2010 to 2014. Statistics like how, like, since 2010, the depression among teen girls has gone up 145%, and among teen boys, it's gone up 161%. You see similar, although not quite as drastic, increases in college students for depression, but also anxiety, a rise in ADHD, and a rise over all age groups to some degree. You know, even seniors maybe a little bit, but among the young, among those who went through puberty with smartphones, there's a significantly higher increase than among those who did not. And so, okay, there are lots of studies showing that, and lots of books, you know, go on to the topic of the impact technology has had, and that's how they start. But this book really surprised me, as John, you were hinting at, that the next 2 chapters just started by explaining the importance of free play, and that's unsupervised for kids. So that's, you know, when your kid goes off, you hear stories of the parent who would, in the summer times, if the sun's up, you have to be out of the house. Don't come back until the sun comes down. No one's watching over them. Certainly no one's hovering over them. And it's like, oh, you know, they'll be fine. It makes me think of like Calvin and Hobbes, just like wandering through the forest by himself. And it reminds me of movies like Goonies and Stand By Me, or the kids in Stranger Things, where, you know, they're just off having their own adventures. So I want to know, for you guys growing up, how closely did your parents watch over you when you went to play outside? Did you ever get into any trouble doing that? And can you recall any valuable learning experiences you had in your ventures?
So I'm the youngest of 4 in my family. And I would say, but when I was of age to even play outside, this is like late 90s, mid 90s. And my parents, I don't know if it's because I'm the youngest, were more protective as well. And so, or maybe because of the time frame as well. So we were allowed to play in the backyard only. I was not allowed to go into the front yard at all. And I couldn't just play with my neighbors out in the front. But in the backyard, free reign. it was unsupervised play back there. I could make all the mud pies I wanted. I was a really innocent little girl. And so I was a kid who would I was a little girl who would just swing on the swings, singing and thanking Jesus for the grass and the birds in the air. Like that literally was just little Irene.
So
And do you
precious.
bake pies now? Was that your valuable life experience?
No, not at all. I didn't really get into a lot of trouble. And I naturally am a rule follower as well. And so I was the younger sister who would tell on my siblings. But unsupervised play in the backyard, certainly.
I kind of was the opposite for Irene. I was a middle child, so I kind of went invisible a lot of the times. If you follow like the memes and jokes about middle children, I'm number 3 out of 6 kids. So I feel like we were kind of the embodiment of a lot of what hate talks about, and we're like the older kids watching the younger kids, and I was kind of in that mix of all those different things. And we had free reign everywhere. I do think it's important to give a caveat that I had the privilege of growing up in a very safe neighborhood where that was an option for me. That is not the reality for other people in other communities, and I'm very aware of that. So in my very safe, very, insulated community, we had pretty much free reign, and we were those kids who would go out and don't come home until the sun is down. The only rules that we had was my dad has this insanely loud whistle that he can do. He's a trumpeter. He was in the Texas A&M marching band, was in the military. So I don't know how or why he created this superpower, but he's got this crazy loud whistle. So we could go anywhere we wanted, but we had to still be able to hear the whistle. And if we weren't home within a set amount of time after that whistle was put out, man, just don't come home. It's not good. Those were our boundaries.
John?
Again, very similar to Katie. I grew up in a very safe neighborhood. I grew up in a rural area, and it was not the type of town that people stopped in if they didn't have business there. And so pretty much the only people in my neighborhood were people who lived in town. And I even knew a lot of the neighbors. And so I knew what houses, I had my home phone number memorized. I knew what houses were safe to go to and asking a parent, can I use or an adult, can I use your phone to call my parents? And I had friends that lived in other areas of town who had bicycles. And ours was truly a be home in time for dinner or be home before dark. My brother and I had a brother, so that helped too. We would go together everywhere. We would get on our bicycles, and we would go miles. I mean, we're talking, my parents could have screamed all day, and I wouldn't have heard them. And there were a couple of times where my parents needed me, and they had to get in their car and drive and find what part of town we were in, and load up our bikes in the back of their car and come home for this reason or that. But we would, I had a friend who lived 1.5 miles away. I knew where his house was. And our first stop was to go bike over there and pick him up. And then we had another friend and we would bike to their house. So lots of free play.
That's cool. I'm thinking of my days back in the late 70s, early 80s, in a suburb in Syracuse, New York, living in a cul-de-sac where everyone knew each other. The kids will all come out into the cul-de-sac and play kick the can. No fences, so just a giant community backyard. I remember one day I just started wandering and wandered all the way over to the street on the other side and found a friend from preschool there. And so we were just hanging out. My mom didn't know where I was. She tried to find me. She hopped in the car, drove around. Eventually she pulled up, and it wasn't this, where have you been? I've been worried sick. It wasn't like Mary and Joseph, when they find Jesus in the temple. It was just, hey, David, come on, it's time to go home. And I'm like, oh, okay. Wow. And then maybe on the drive home, something to the effect of, if you're gonna go play over there next time, just tell me. There was no sense of danger or anything. Again, being fortunate to grow up in a safe neighborhood, but also in a culture and in a time where everyone knew each other. There were friendships.
Yeah. How old were you when you did that?
3 or 4.
Whoa. Wow. That's incredible.
Yeah. It's just that was the neighborhood we were in, and it was the time we lived in.
Yeah.
So, as far as valuable learning experiences, I could go into a time that a friend of mine and I almost died climbing a cliff together, unsupervised, in Granbury, but it's probably too late for reckless endangerment lawsuits against my dad, John, right?
There's a statute of limitations. We're good.
Okay. All right, but
So you're good.
sadly, we don't have time, so that'll have to wait for some other podcasts. But speaking of how things have changed, and I'm glad you mentioned it, Katie, because we probably all thought that, yeah, sometimes it actually does depend on the neighborhood in which you live, whether or not you trust your neighbors or not, how long you've even been in that neighborhood. Some families move a lot, and so there's never even a time to build trust with the community. Nevertheless, the book proposes that there's a lot of growth and a lot of development that happens among our kids and our young people when they're able to play unsupervised. And he points out that just like other mammals, we do a lot of learning just through play. We learn to speak the language by just playing with the language. We don't realize we're learning the language. We're just having fun. And in chapter 3, he talks about here are the advantages of when you can have unsupervised play. And in that chapter, I just want to hear what advantages stood out to you most. And had you ever thought of this type of play as vital to development before?
Okay. Now that we're getting into some of the more specifics of the book, I need to give a disclaimer because I'm the attorney on the podcast. I need to give a disclaimer before we get into this, which is, a lot of our listeners are Christian. And I don't know if you're like me, a lot of the books you read about this type of thing tend to be from a Christian perspective. And so this book is really good and really helpful. And there are a lot of things I love about it, particularly how data driven it is. And he's a sociologist and he focuses on studies and facts. But it is not written from a Christian perspective. And so anyone who's going to read this book, I think you need to know that when you pick it up. I'll just give a brief example. He kind of glosses over the history of evolution and human development, and there is no room for a creationist view in there or any type of design or whatever. And so if you're looking for a book that's going to say, this is how we were designed to be, and here's how we got off course, this is not that book, because it doesn't talk about an intelligent design or anything like that. So I hope...
Good point.
I hope as we get into some of this stuff, I don't sound like a contrarian or, a hater on the book, because I'm not. I've enjoyed the book. But I do think it's important to note that as we talk about some of this stuff, that it is coming from a agnostic type of perspective on religion that focuses, solely on numerical data without any reference towards religion.
Yeah, although he does recognize the value of religion, but he ascribes it to, we've evolved to be religious because that's helped us with our moral code. You should listen to his most recent podcast with Russell Moore, where Russell Moore basically tries to witness to him on the podcast and says, hey, you're recognizing all of these benefits. Has that changed your view maybe on whether or not there's a God?
Yeah, I did listen to it, and I have a couple more specific examples that I'll allude to later, which is why I wanted to kind of establish that up front.
Great, we love that.
I really liked just the way he described, like, I think if he said it was play mode versus defend mode or discovery mode.
Yeah.
And just the importance of that, I definitely see, especially my 4-year-old, I think is kind of in that sweet spot that he's talking about, and the importance of being in discovery mode and letting her safely experience, limited amounts of, danger for a 4-year-old, and for her, it could be something like, you need to get on the swing and climb it up yourself. And I'm not going to pick you up and put you on the swing right now, and kind of trying to see different ways that I am stepping back a little bit from her now. Like, she's so used to me helping her do all the things. After reading this book, I've taken even for her, a noticeable step back, but it's also been really fun because now I've seen her, and we've got a neighbor who's the exact same age as her next door, and I see her leading him, being like, come with me, friend, and I'll show you how to do it, because he doesn't know how to do it either, because his mom also does it. She and I share the same problem of helping too much, and so we're kind of each other's support buddies right now, pulling back a little and letting our 4-year-olds try things and maybe skin their knee, or sometimes they do fall and sometimes they bonk their heads against each other, but letting them sort that out themselves, and the value that we're kind of seeing, that self-confidence that we're seeing that he talks about a lot in that discovery mode. I'm seeing it, and it has been encouraging to see that growing in her.
Yeah, absolutely. The advantage of self-confidence of when I step out on my own, I am able to tackle the challenge in front of me. But we have to step back for them to even have that challenge in the first place.
Yeah.
With my boys, I'm in that same kind of age sweet spot. So the day we're recording this episode, my baby is now officially a toddler. He turned a year old today, and I've been emotional all week and looking back at photos, and even photos of our oldest, and I found I saw a video yesterday where my oldest, he was probably, I don't even know what age, just 3 or in his 2s, but just exploring around like a small step ladder and a stool, because I have a lot of stools because of my height to step on, step stools. Because of my height, I have a lot of step stools around the house. And so he's just exploring, and he's, even watching the video, I was like, he's about to fall. But I remember just letting him just explore and stand on a step stool. And so one of my favorite pieces in that chapter is, he says, thrilling experiences have antiphobic effects. And so he talks about even new experiences being inoculations for anxiety. And so allowing that exploration helps our children to not create fears. And so those thrilling experiences. And so just this week, my almost 4-year-old went onto a new area of a playground, and for me it was scary to see him go through that rock climbing. It was a much bigger wall, but I let him, largely because of some of the things I've read in the book and listened to as well. It's interesting, and so to me, allowing those thrilling experiences in order to develop just a healthy exploration.
That's good. John, do you have a rebuttal?
I don't have a rebuttal, but I liked that. I liked that part as well. The specific example he gives in the books of like climbing trees, and that people who are afraid of heights or climbing trees are not people that have done it and fallen. It's people that have never done it at all. And I think that taps into something we know is true, which is we fear the unknown a lot more. Once we know something, I tell this to my wife too. She's scared of scorpions. And don't get me wrong, being stung by a scorpion is not great. But I've been stung 4 or 5 different times in my life, and I survived, and it was okay. And I am not terrified of scorpions because I know that while it hurts, it's okay. But my wife has never been stung, and I have told her...
Sounds like a true rural guy.
I've told her, I almost wish you would get stung once, because you would see it's not as bad as you think. It is not great. I don't wish it on people, but same with falling out of a tree. I've fallen out of a tree, and it hurts, and it's not great, but you survive. Now, I will say... he thinks that we've swung too far towards overprotection in the real world. And so I think he swings a little bit too far back the other direction towards less protection. And I would have liked to see a little bit more balance,
Agreed. Yeah.
He talks about how kids do things that get them cuts and scrapes, which my kid does. If you look at my kid's knees, they're always skinned. She's always bruised. She loves that stuff. But then he talks about a statistic about how the number of broken bones have fallen from 10 to 14-year-old boys, and how that's bad because it indicates they're not doing things that would break their bones. So I'm like, I don't know. I don't know that we need to be breaking our bones, right? Muscles atrophy if we don't use them. So it's good to tear a muscle and rebuild it. Yeah. Bones don't always heal the same way. And I'm not sure. And so, seatbelts in cars and then car seat requirements, these are good safety protections. And so some of these safety developments are positive, and not all of the, he points to playgrounds specifically. Playgrounds weren't safe. We made them all too safe for liability reasons. And I understand that to some extent, but there were serious accidents that happened on playgrounds that, harmed children for the rest of their lives, not just a nick or scrape that would heal eventually. So I think it's a little bit more nuanced and a little bit more balanced than what he puts, but I do agree with the overall sentiment that we have gone too far towards real world overprotection.
Yeah. I would just add on top of that, just adding more nuance to the conversation. I'm glad you brought up the playground comment. I'm a huge fan of the new playgrounds that we're seeing out there because they are being designed to be much more accessible to children with disabilities, children who are prone to elopement, all sorts of issues that I think are valid, and trying to make it safer doesn't mean we're lessening the childhood experience.
Yeah. I'd also say that in some ways it's more unsupervised because I've been to a lot of playgrounds where the parents are paying zero attention to the kids because they're on their phones. So, for what that's worth.
True.
Fair.
I try not to judge them. All right, so what we're talking about is something that Jonathan calls safetyism. I probably didn't coin that term, but it's where there's more of a value on being safe than on the value placed on the education we can get from taking risks. But he also points out that there's kind of an irony to it, that he says, we've become overprotective in the physical world, where overall the risks for most people are over-exaggerated. But at the same time, we're way less protective in the virtual online world, where the risks are actually so much greater and so much more common. So when you hear about the dangers of the online virtual world for minors and for young people, what are some of the typical dangers that you often hear mentioned in those situations?
Well, one of the examples I thought of right away is I have a family member who, when they were a minor, was tricked into sending illicit pictures of themselves out on the internet and really lacked understanding what that would mean long term for their life, and just understanding, that they were a minor, understanding that just the exploitation of that person and the impact that had on their lives. That always terrifies me. That's one of the biggest ones that worries me, and just trying to make sure that my children know that once it's out there, there's no pulling it back in. There's no such thing as a private, DM or anything like that, that those are all just misnomers that just give a false sense of security.
Yeah, online predation. I remember watching a video where a group of adults took an adult female in the group and used filters to make her look underage, put her on Instagram, and in under a minute, adult men were DMing her.
That's a big one. Sexual predators, catfishing to some extent, like people pretending they're a regular kid when they're really not. They're an adult, middle-aged adult living somewhere, are big concerns. These aren't specific to youth, but even like spyware and ransomware and getting scammed or hacked.
Yeah.
Meeting child traffickers online who will, I've had a bad day, I'm fighting with my parents, and they start by just consoling you, but then they say, well, let's meet at McDonald's and I'll get you a soda or ice cream or whatever, and trying to meet up in the real world. And then as they get older teens and young adults, extremism, finding your silo of people,
that's a good one.
Right-wing extremism for like nationalism type stuff, but also I remember there were young girls going to fly to Iraq and join Al-Qaeda and stuff. Remember that when that would happen?
Yeah.
They would find these terrorist groups online, and these terrorists would tell them all this stuff and validate them and all this stuff. And there were some really intense news articles about dads trying to get their daughters back home because they couldn't come back home because the U.S. government had labeled them terrorists because they had gone and married Al-Qaeda members and stuff. And it just... Wow. The tendency towards extremism.
I think going along the lines of messaging, I was thinking again, because I'm monitoring my children, I was thinking even just messaging within kids' videos. And so how sometimes you hear about there's a kids video and then halfway through it'll warp into some other type of video or messaging. And so that's the type of predatory practices that I think of.
Yeah.
I've seen Peppa Pig videos that have done that, while my daughter was watching it, and it was really terrifying.
Yeah, and the strategy behind those is not too different from just the strategy of social media in general, which is I'm just going to do whatever it takes to keep your attention, and something that's shocking is going to shock them, but it's going to keep their attention. And then there's I think YouTube's done a better job of cracking down on that, but there was a time where it was just rampant. But it can never be fully stopped because the new videos pop up all the time. So we hear about those types of things where the content is unhealthy, or the sexual predation, the contacts that happen through DMs and stuff. But then Jonathan mentions like just 4 foundational harms of smartphones and social medias that happen to teens. And these I was kind of surprised because I'm like, oh, this is just talking like a general, this will most likely happen to some degree to all of them, whether or not they go into these dark corners of the internet or not. And he just mentions social deprivation, sleep deprivation, attention fragmentation, and addiction. But before we talk specifically about teens, could we also admit that this impacts adult as well? These things: social deprivation, sleep deprivation, attention fragmentation, and addiction. And so let's put a little egg on our face here. Are there any of these 4 that you can relate to for yourself and say, maybe I don't really struggle with this, but at least I feel the impact, this one impacting me?
I for sure feel the draw of just that attention fragmentation in general. I just feel like I have so many tabs open all the time. I definitely struggle just wanting to stay focused on one task and staying there and feeling the draw of my phone. It's lighting up, my watch is vibrating. I have all these things pulling. So that was the one that most resonated. And I was like, yeah, I see that in me.
Well, Katie, I'm amazed your neck just hasn't broken from all the hats you wear. That causes all of those tabs to be open. And you're not just jumping from task to task, you're jumping from role to role within Texas Baptist. We don't know how you do it. We respect and love you.
Very much so.
Thank you.
I think in true transparency, I see a little bit of every single one of the ones mentioned. And I would even say addiction. I was mentioning this book to someone a few months ago, 2 months ago, and she said, it's amazing how we like to even have our phones right next to us. And she did like a real time example, and she grabbed my phone and put it next to her. And I literally felt this little tug of like, why are you touching my phone? And I was shocked that I felt that.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I didn't realize how much I appreciate having my phone right next to me, in my pocket, on my desk, in the cup holder, wherever it may be. And for me, it's not as much social media, but emails, whether that's work or other hats that I wear in ministry or family business. It's constantly using my smart device for work. And so really it's almost like a work addiction, but truly that smart device addiction of I need to know and have something to do with work constantly.
Yeah.
Mine is also attention fragmentation, although I do think there's a bleed kind of a little bit between what's fragmenting your attention is your addiction. So I think there's a little bit of overlap there. But I, similar to Katie, again, and I feel like I'm agreeing with her on everything today. But that's my struggle. That's my struggle with my phone. I don't know that I am a great multitasker. I don't work best as a multitasker, but it's a shame because I'm constantly multitasking. And part of it is, my phone and the media that I consume through it. And there are different ways that I can try to justify it. A lot of it is for work, and so that seems important. But yes, even just when we will have a meeting, a work meeting or something, I will find myself having my attention fragmented. And if I do a good job of not looking at my phone for the entire time, for example, when we get done with this podcast, I'll have 30 missed emails. And I'm like, see, this is what happens if you're not looking at your phone and checking your email while you're doing this other task. It builds up on you, and now I have all these things to go through. So
I feel like I need to confess at this very moment while we're recording, I have tabs open and I'm seeing my number ding.
I will confess that I have checked my phone since we started recording this podcast.
I have mine right next to me.
Katie's also famously had multiple tabs of our studio up at the same time.
I literally told y'all, I actually meant literal tabs open.
There's like FOMO, like a fear of missing out. There's probably something that's like a fear of closing a tab you'll need later, where like you just can't close tabs because you might need that information later.
Yeah, that's fair enough. For me, the one I really feel, and I don't, it's not because of myself, but because of what's happened with other people in my life to some degree, is the social deprivation one. That I feel like there's people who, things would happen in their lives in the past and they'd reach out to me, but now it's enough for them to just post them on social media as opposed to reaching out to me as an individual. And then they'll be upset that I don't know about it, but it just wasn't in the algorithm to come across my feed, even though I follow them and, love them and they're a family member. But I'll say, but part of it is like, I guess I'm also a bit of an extrovert, probably more than an introvert most days. It kind of depends on the day, but most days I'm more of an extrovert. And I don't know if it might be, I don't know how we'd test this, but I think of the four of us, I'm probably the one who feels the worst when we haven't met in person in a while. And I just feel it put me in a funk and just make me not like my job as much, not like you as much, not like what the tasks that I have to do. And it has nothing to do with what I'm doing or who you are as people. We just haven't been in person, and all of our communication's been just through all the other ways that we communicate, not even phone calls. And I get grumpy when I don't get to be around the people I work with or the people I love. And so, I feel the social deprivation. So thank you. That was therapeutic for me.
Does this do the little heart? Is it like Zoom?
Hey everyone, you are experiencing an abrupt end to the podcast because we went so long we had to stretch it into 2. But we didn't want to leave without a what is good for this first half. Join us next week where we'll abruptly continue wherever we left in our conversation that I haven't figured out where that is yet. Are we still the 4 hosts of the apocalypse at this point? I don't know anymore. I think we
keep riding with it.
Now we're the monkeys. Keep saying we're monkeying around.
I see what you did there.
We're too busy podcasting to put anybody down. All right. Speaking of, let's have a second what is good, which will probably come first in the thing. And thank you all for bearing with us through what ended up being a really great discussion. And definitely come back in 2 weeks for part 2 because it's really, really good. The discussion continues to be beneficial. So, guys, what is good?
So I want to share about the ways that my daughter, who is a new Christian, who just accepted Christ a few months ago, is already like witnessing to her friends because it is just so awesome. So we have a summer activities chart that hangs up in our house, and they're in different things. There are 12 things on there, and Vivian is supposed to do 9 of them every day. Help in the kitchen, feed the deer, clean up or make her bed. And one of them is read the Bible or do one of her Bible activity sheets or whatever. And a friend came over and was like looking at the activity chart and was like, what is this? And what is this one? And she said, read the Bible. And her friend was like, what's the Bible? And so Vivian got to tell her, a little bit about what the Bible was. And we also had a different friend that we were hanging out with. We're doing more play dates now that there's not school. And went to lunch together, and Vivian prayed at the table over her food without us saying anything, and in front of her friend who isn't a Christian and doesn't go to church and doesn't pray. And so anyway, it's just cool. She's just living her life, but in the way that she lives her life, she's witnessing to her friends, and I just think that's really good. That's what is good.
That's really cool.
So my what is good is just kind of something exciting going on, but it also go along with kind of a funny thing in our family. So we're leaving tomorrow to go see my in-laws, my husband's family in Indiana. And that's going to be really fun. We're really excited about going to see them. We don't get to see them nearly as often as we want. I have incredible in-laws, and I'm so excited about it. But funny fact, I am big anti-minivan, okay? Minivan haters, y'all are going to just y'all get it. And if you're a minivan lover, don't come at me. I already have my decision. We're just not a minivan family. The tragedy in all of that is that our middle daughter, Felicity, loves minivans. It's I can't explain her love of minivans. She just does. One time at a park, she tried to climb into a stranger's minivan just because she loves them so much. So we are surprising her by renting a minivan to drive to Indiana. And when she sees it, she's going to get in it and she's not going to get out the rest of the morning. So you guys, I will send pictures to our group chat tomorrow and y'all can see Lissy beaming sitting in our rented minivan. It's, something that she can enjoy but will never have in her life.
What a beautiful example of the condescension of Christ. Like, for a period of time, you will humble yourself for her sake and her joy.
Wow.
Yeah, that's exactly why I was doing it.
Irene, what is good?
Yes, going along with the spirit of family, and again, just part of my emotional week of thinking of my baby now officially becoming a toddler. I'm just so thankful for community support. So we have 2 boys, and when we found out we were having another boy, I thought, great, I saved all the clothes and all the toys, all the books. We have all the board books. And so really what we needed and asked for were diapers. And so we got through 11 months of our baby's life with gifted diapers. Part of that was my couponing.
Wow.
But that is extremely good. And so I am just now having to buy diapers
That's
for the
amazing.
first time. And I am so thankful for that. And it was a lot of just great community around us and good couponing as well. But just very grateful and to have that blessing.
That's neat.
David, what's good?
All right, so I'm trying to figure out when we're going to divide our podcast episode, but I'm thinking Irene mentioning the Good Pictures, Bad Pictures book for juniors will probably be in part 2, and she talked about reading it with her kid. We read the older version with my daughter when she was 7 years old. My wife and I would read with her a chapter at a time and talk about it, and she absorbed it, and like most kids, she just absorbs and kind of remembers everything in a scary way that makes you want to make sure you never say anything uncouth around them, But we were driving home from school one day, and I nearly drove off the road because one of the things the book Good Pictures, Bad Pictures does, at least with the older kids, is if someone tries to show you pornography, you're supposed to name it. You're supposed to say, no, that's pornography. That's bad. I don't want to look at it. So here we are driving down the road, and I just hear Naomi go, pornography! And I was like, where? And she's like, there. And she pointed to a truck in front of us that had a decal on the back of it, and it was one of those Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes peeing, where he has his pants down, so it's showing his bum. And I thought to myself, I am so acclimated to certain types of crudeness in our world that God would still, in his holiness and purity, frown upon, even something like that. But I wouldn't have thought of it as pornography, but it is showing a naked bum. And my daughter called it out, and I was thankful for that. So that was my What is Good. The book, Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, and how it challenges kids to call out what is not good when they see it.
Wow, I love that.
Katie, you had something you wanted to share too?
Oh, yeah. This is just a sweet little picture for you guys of a get-together that we had shortly after my little mom group all read Anxious Generation, and we invited our friends over. They were supposed to come over for a movie night, but then the kids just kind of naturally were outside and started playing, and this was about an hour and a half after the movie was supposed to have started. They were still outside just running and playing and like coming up with all sorts of different things. And so I sent that to my mom group and I was like, hey guys, the kids might be home a little bit late today because they're just outside having too much fun. And it was just such a sweet and pure just thing to observe and watch, and was very just awesome to be able to watch the kids do that.
That's awesome.
That is really, really cool. All right. Well, we will say goodbye for now, and we'll pick up next time. So bye.
Bye.
I don't know how to do
Bye.
this. This is not protocol. We don't have a procedure set into place for dividing an episode into two, but we're having a lot of fun.
All right.
Let me close my Discord after I read this meme someone just sent me. Oh, tapes had a side A and a side B, so it's only logical that their successor would be the CD.
I saw that meme yesterday.
Oh, okay. It's floating around.
I never thought of that.
I don't know. It's not quite the... I don't know.
I
Didn't
know.
really grab me.
It's an abbreviation of compact disc, so...
Yeah.
So it works, but it doesn't work.
If instead of calling it tapes, we called it rubber cement, that would make more sense to me. I won't send that one out. Okay, are you guys ready?
Let's go.